Our next speaker is Emmett McGroarty. Emmett is the Executive Director of the Preserve Innocence Initiative at the American Principles Project. The mission is to protect parental rights and fight policies that drive a wedge between parents and their children. So that's a really important component of this Common Core initiative. He will be speaking about the effect of Common Core on parental rights. So please welcome Emmett McGroarty.
Thank you. I want to start off on a very positive note before I go into my talk. So, all of the panelists here today have been traveling around the country and more importantly, communicating around the country with parents on this issue and related issues. And I think probably many of you already sense this or know this, but something has really happened in America, I think, because of this issue. And I think that parents and other citizens are waking up to the reality that they really have to have a say in their children's upbringing and education. And I think for probably 50 years or so, there's been this view, and probably kind of encouraged by elitists, that the world has become complex and the ideas of our founding, although quaint and nice, really can't undergird our society anymore. That is that we can't have citizen-directed government. We really need experts to decide things for us. And I think for various reasons we've been pushed that way, and parents have been gradually marginalized and have maybe subconsciously accepted that push, that marginalization, and then of course that lends credence to what the elitists are thinking or saying, that well, parents don't care, so we need to be even more aggressive in determining education policy. But on this Common Core and the related privacy now, parents are waking up. And in some states, they, for various reasons, have caught on faster than other states. But I would say in the top tier states, this is the number one issue in those states. And it's an issue that's not going to go away. It's not like I live in Maryland, and I grew up in Washington, D.C., and down there we have a bag tax. So yeah, there was a little bit of resistance when the bag tax was passed. That is, if you go shopping, you get a bag, you pay a nickel tax. So there's some resistance now. Everyone seems to be okay with it. But that's not the case on this issue. People are waking up, and I think they're reclaiming the idea on which our country was founded, that we really need to be citizen-directed, and nowhere is that more important than in the education and upbringing of our children. So that's what's happening, and I think that's a very positive development. And it's caught the Common Core proponents and developers off guard. They never expected such an uprising, and it's caught the media off guard. They still don't understand the intensity or appreciate the intensity of this movement, and it has become. It has become a mom-led movement. I mean, people like Yvonne just get involved in that. So how did we get here? And Yvonne touched on this, and I'll start with for the last 65, I mean, since 1965, we've increasingly been allowing the federal government more of a role in education policymaking. And then with No Child Left Behind, there was a huge leap further down that road. And you remember with No Child Left Behind, we kept hearing that mantra, well, we're going to have accountability, we're going to have accountability, we're going to have accountability. But really, they never finished the sentence. The issue was accountability to whom? And the reason why that's important is because in any situation, it's very hard to have two systems of accountability. That is, it's very hard to have accountability running in two different directions. And on education, it's hard to have accountability running to the federal government and at the same time running in the opposite direction to parents. And now, with the Common Core, we have increasingly the advent of the rise of another actor on the stage, and that's the corporate world. And I don't say that lightly. I'm a capitalist. I like to use that word, I'm a capitalist. I believe in free markets. I believe that capitalism is the economic philosophy that mirrors democracy. Through capitalism, as with through democracy, individuals express their liberties. Of course, we don't live in a purely democratic society. Right? We live in a constitutional democratic republic. So rights and the Constitution are the foundation of our society. But the corporate world is, I think Americans look at it, rightly so, as good and necessary. And this would include the entrepreneur and the small business owners from which so many inventions and improvements spring. But capitalism is not the same as corporatism. And that's what I think we've sort of lost track of that, probably in the same way that parents have been disengaged and disaffected from education policy. Corporations shouldn't be dictating or guiding education policy.
That's right.
And with the Common Core effort, we're really in danger of that happening, if not, it's already happened. And this isn't just, I don't think this is just abstract. You know, and I think back of when I was growing up, I grew up in the inner city, and the school was a very special place. When a parent walked into the school building, everybody in the building knew a boss was in the building. Parents, teachers, and students. And that was a wonderful thing, especially for children, because children got to see adults and other children responding in a very positive way to their parents. And when parents came in and asked questions about education and what was being taught, they got answers, if not changes. And Common Core takes that away from us in the areas that it touches. You know, you go in and ask, well, I'm just wondering, why is it my children are learning how to add from left to right rather than right to left, as has been done for 2,000 years? Well, we've adopted the Common Core. Well, those who adopted it, the state board did, or the Catholic superintendent, or whatever they, you know, we adopted the Common Core. Well, why? I don't know. Okay, can we change the Common Core? No, there's no process in place for changing the Common Core. Well, who wrote that? Well, it was a private association funded by private entities. Well, then why didn't we adopt it? Well, I answered that already. I don't know. But don't forget, we have a bake sale tomorrow. I think this is having a profound impact. And what we have to do is go back to our beginning. And in the Common Core, we see the real advent of corporate involvement in education in a very powerful way that we haven't seen before. And I think it bears in mind to look at this, because what's happening in the fight back against the Common Core, the opponents are invariably big business. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce or their local affiliates, business roundtables, ExxonMobil's running ads. Lisa and Renee are here from Utah, so they kicked off their mom-led movement. Actually, it shows the power of the people, if you think about it. So they kicked off their mom-led movement along with Crystal Swayze, which now numbers in like 7,000 people. ExxonMobil started running ads in the state. So what's going on here? Education, public K-12 education in the United States is about a $500 to $600 billion a year industry. And if you think about it, they just spend 0.5% of that on PR and government relations. That's a very, very powerful, maybe even daunting force to come up against. And if you're going to talk to your legislators and your governors about Common Core, that's who your opponents will be. But as for me, my money is with the moms. So that's how big the industry is. But then on top of that, you see governments, local, state, and even the federal government is under pressure to spend less. And you see defense spending going down. And so you have all these government contractors who are looking around for their next contract. Well, one area that really is no outward pressure to spend less is education. Is a fact. Matter of fact, over the years, it's always a rallying cry among politicians. We're going to spend more on education. Not necessarily a bad thing, but you can see how it attracts the corporate interest. And then on top of that, increasingly in education, you have, as the professor was saying, increasingly technology. So you have all these technology companies circling around like sharks for a piece of the pie. And then you have a lot of media companies that their traditional businesses are going down, and they're getting engaged. So Pearson has an ownership interest in Financial Times and The Economist. They used to be primarily a publishing company, now a news publishing company. Now they're, I think, the largest textbook manufacturer in the world, and they have a lot of these Common Core contracts. And Washington Post is a player. When Pioneer and my entity that I work for, think tank, American Principles Project, when we were out at ALEC trying to get them to accept anti-Common Core model legislation, one of the groups that was fighting against us was News Corp.
Yep.
So that's what's going on, and I say that then when you go and look at the process of the Common Core, then you understand that really is what's happened is that the people have been completely marginalized, and even the states have been marginalized. And so I'd just like to run through that, try to do it succinctly. So as Yvonne was saying, well, let me back up. So the idea of national standards has been around for a while. And kind of No Child Left Behind kind of set the table to really make a big push on it. So some groups like the Hunt Institute started making a push, I would say, a renewed push around 2006. They recruited some private foundations, most notably the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which I think through Washington Post reported through January of this year has spent over $150 million on the effort. And much of it in grants to other associations, to associations, private associations, to kind of get them to propagate the issue. Associations, mostly of state officials. They recruited two associations in particular to the effort, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Now, it's because of the involvement of these entities that we hear the Common Core is state-led. But that is nothing to be really further from the truth. These are privately incorporated entities. As Yvonne said, the author, published, and have a copyright on the Common Core. But they don't have grants of authority from the states. The governors and school chiefs participate in the associations as kind of club members. And I would say, not believe when they're there, that's not state action that's happening. It's private action. So these associations aren't subject to any of the normal indicia of state action. They're not subject to sunshine laws, freedom of information requests, open meeting requirements. Furthermore, they're even headquartered in the District of Columbia. They're not even headquartered in any state. So it's hard to imagine whether the states could even get general legal jurisdiction over them. And then they take, so it's essentially they're borrowing the titles of their members, the governors and school chiefs, and using them for their own purposes. They get private funding, and as Joy Pullman of Heartland Institute discovered, they take federal money as well. So it's hard to, just based on that, it's hard to even conceive of that as being, of their activities as being directed by the states. So in 2006, 2007, they started receiving massive funding for this effort and started kind of laying the groundwork for the Common Core. Not writing the standards, but laying we'll call it the strategic groundwork, the political groundwork in which to bring it into the states. Toward the end of 2008, December 2008, they wrote a document called Benchmarking for Success. And this was their memo essentially to the incoming administration as to what they thought the administration should do when it comes to education policy. And you go through and look at it, and I'll just give you a few snippets from it. But this is what Benchmarking for Success called for. Remember, this is December 2008. It called for a new vision for the historic state-federal partnership in education, one in which the federal government could assist states in specific ways at each stage of the journey, including by incentivizing states to, as soon as possible, offer new funding or allow existing funds to be used to upgrade state standards by adopting a common core of internationally benchmarked standards in math and language arts for grades K to 12. and to help ensure that assessments are aligned to the standards. And to help ensure that textbooks, curricula, and curricula are also aligned with the standards. The report called for the federal government to offer a range of tiered incentives to make the next stage of the journey easier, so the stage after getting common standards. And this next stage of the journey they called for was the increased flexibility in the use of federal funds. So what you have in this is you have the NGA, supposedly representing the states, and the Council of Chief State School Officers and Achieve Inc., funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You can look up benchmarking for success. It says that right there in the acknowledgments. So purportedly representing the interests of states, but calling on the federal government to initiate what became known as Race to the Top, and then what was later rolled out essentially as the No Child Left Behind Flexibility Waiver. So that was December 2008. So then what happened? Well, the president got sworn in, and Congress embedded in the stimulus bill a $4.35 billion for what became known as Race to the Top. And the administration enacted it. Kicked off the grant program. Now, the grant program had a couple of twists. So this was in January, February 2009. So the grant program is announced. When it's announced, the Secretary Duncan, acknowledged the work that Gates and Achieve had been doing in forming national, advocating for a common core, and he said he wanted to be the catalyst that makes that happen. That was his response on C-SPAN in response to the question of what are you going to do with the money. So the grant program called for states to sign on to the common set of standards. Well, there was only one program or even one talk, one program, one effort up and running at that point, and that was the effort by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. And then to apply for the grant, you had to join a consortia. Again, there was only one consortia for common standards across all states, and you got high points if you joined a consortia that involved more than half the states. Well, since there was only one effort out there, that was the dominant effort, and in fact the only effort. And then you also had to join a consortia of states that was applying for the Race to the Top assessment grants. And these were, this was the federal government's efforts to have a standardized test tied to the standards. And why is that important? Is probably many of you or all of you know, the idea was to have standards, and then you have high stakes assessments tied to the standards, i.e. teachers evaluated by how students do on the high stakes assessments, the standardized tests. That would ensure that the Common Core was taught. So the federal government funded these two consortia of states. So, told the states, well, you have to join a consortia of other states, and then the states contracted out to entities, private entities, to develop the assessments. the states had to sign on to an assessment, and they had to submit with their Race to the Top application the memorandum of understanding for the assessments. So in doing that, the states had essentially obligated themselves to using the assessments, and because they were using the assessments, implementing the Common Core at the time that they submitted their application. Then when you walk through the timeline, you realize how coercive this process was. And Yvonne got into this a little bit. But so the first, the announcement for the Race to the Top program came out in November 2009. Race to the Top was in 2 phases, phase 1 and 2. The phase 1 application was due from the states in January 2010. So in that application, the states had to, number 1, commit to using the Common Core, but number 2, they had to have already joined an assessment that was one of the 2 consortia. So that further committed them to using the Common Core. But not only that, but it served notice that they were essentially going to jump their own state assessment systems in math and English. So that was January 2010. And then in March 2010, the first public draft of the standards came out. Go back, states had already committed to the Common Core before the first public draft was out. June 1, 2010, the second phase applications were due. So more states joined the process and signed on, submitted their applications and thereby signed on to the Common Core. That was June 1, 2010. The next day, June 2nd, 2010, the final draft of the Common Core was released. And then there was a grace period. States had until August 2nd, 2010, if they had not already done so, to have fulfilled their commitment by formally adopting the Common Core. So this is what happened. States had essentially, they were almost all of them accepted and adopted by the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education had to, in that 2-month period, they had to sit down, evaluate the Common Core, compare the Common Core with their old standards, presumably decide which one was better, and then you kind of think, well, what else should they be doing? Probably give notice to the legislature, since this is billed as a program that would transform the education of every child in America. And then perhaps hold some town hall meetings, give a full briefing of the Common Core to the people. And that was never done. Some states had some cursory public town hall meetings. Most of them had none whatsoever. And so that was kind of how the states had gotten roped into it. Then there's one more thing to consider. So this was June 2010. Well, for the previous year and a half since the Common Core was announced, you had all these governors and state superintendents, both Democrat and Republican, publicly stating how great the Common Core system was going to be. Parodying the talking points, the promise of the Common Core, that these standards were going to be internationally benchmarked, evidence-based, rigorous, clearer, fewer, deeper, higher. So you have these governors and school chiefs saying this for a year and a half, and then they get the product. They don't have time to really give a briefing on the product. Probably don't even have time to study it themselves. Why? Well, as Yvonne was saying, it was drafted by private entities behind closed doors. But they've been saying for a year and a half how great it was. So they painted themselves into a corner. So highly relevant, though, how this happened, because that's the process. It's the process of how the standards came down. This shows how they're controlled by outside entities. But going forward, the states have given up their autonomy over standards, governance of standards. If they're going to be part of a common system and participate in common assessments, then at best, they have a seat at the table in determining how the standards are going to be changed. What's on the assessments? How teachers are going to be evaluated? What the cut scores are going to be? How many days of testing there should be? How much money is going to be spent on testing? How much money is going to be spent on the technology that underlies these computerized tests? They've given up control over all of this. And really, what are we talking about when we say the states? It's the parents. The parents have no say in this now. So that's the situation we're in. But like I said from the beginning, this is a national movement. People realize what's happening, and they're driving this, and I think they're driving this to a decisive turnaround to really get back to one of the foundational principles of America, that we need citizen-directed government, and the education of a child has to start with the parent, the child, and the teacher.